Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Awakened Soul Stories. I know it's been a few weeks since we gave you another episode, but I was waiting for this guest. We've been talking for about a year, and she was in the middle of writing her book, and she wanted to finish her book before she came on the podcast so that we would have something really interesting to talk about, although we always have interesting things to talk about. And her name is Sherry Marriott. And yes, and Sherry and I met about, I know we were just talking about this 10 years ago, and just in a holistic circle that we ran around in, basically. And I went to her office a few times, and as she came to mine, we have an awful lot of friends and colleagues in common, and admire each other's work a lot. And I'm really excited about talking to Sherry about this new book that she has. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sherry to everybody and just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then, we'll dive right into the book, okay?
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is fun and a little bit scary because I'm new to this world, but I'm happy to get my feet wet with somebody so sweet and familiar.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you. So, a little about myself. I worked for many years in the allopathic health fields, in ophthalmology in particular, and I had kids late in life. And one of those children really came with many struggles, and I needed to find out what was happening with him. And so by the time he came around, I was able to be a stay-at-home mom. And as he aged, I grew in different ways. So I began to look towards holistic medicine and holistic practices in order to help him, because the doctors I was bringing him to did not have solutions. And so I had to find them. So that was how I got to where I am today in regards to this. So I've retrained in many different ways. I'm a yoga and meditation teacher. I practice many forms of energy healing. I do holistic counseling and wellness work, and a few other things. And now I'm an author, so I'm really excited to share this book because I wish I would have had all this information when my kids were growing up. And it takes a long time for understanding, to kind of accumulate. And so even though my kids are grown now, I decided I was going to write this book to help moms who are struggling with their kids. If you've looked at the stats of kids' health and wellness, they are not good.
Right.
Yeah. So you're aware, being a mom yourself, like the epidemic of anxiety is one thing that's always on my mind. I think all the young people in my life claim they have it to some degree. And I used to think that I knew what that was. Initially in my health and wellness journey, it was all about the food. Like, oh my gosh, the food is so toxic and so poison. And, it's way more than that. It's a lot. Everything, body, mind, and spirit all has to be, in alignment for us to feel well. And I know you know that.
That's okay. Speaking to a mother who has a child that has special needs, I understand. I understand some of your pain.
Yeah, I'm sure that you do. It's so hard to watch them struggle. So I just kind of combined many different modalities in order to address those struggles. And that's how ReWild Your Child got born.
So that's, I know we discussed a little bit about this, but, the name is very intriguing. ReWild Your Child, and as you had stated before, everybody has their own perception about what that means. So coming from you, who wrote this book and picked the title, what exactly does rewild mean?
Well, it doesn't mean make them run naked through the woods like I've been asked. Rewild is definitely a scientific kind of occultish term from conservation circles. So in In that circle, in conservation circles, rewilding refers to the restoration of land, patches of land to their original nature so that their innate features can thrive. So just like the earth has suffered industrial and toxic ravages, so have we, right? Above and below. What happens above happens below, within and without. So we can't continue to poison the land without seeing repercussions. And that may mean some natural flora and fauna do not thrive there anymore. And the same is said with our children. We cannot continue to introduce toxins to them and expect their body to respond well to that. So we have a whole generation of kids whose gut microbiome, similar to the forest biome, is really disrupted. And there are many reasons for that, which I go over in chapter 2. So that's what the rewilding term is really about.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. And I'll just say one more thing. I think it's on the back cover of the book. This book really shines a light on how our kids are becoming more unhealthy each year in parallel with the decline of our environment. And it goes on to chart a path for parents to walk their kids away from the toxicity of our times and back into sync with the seasonal cycles, all while supporting the unique needs of their body, mind, and spirit. It's a tricky path. We can't treat everybody the same.
No, we can't. Now, how did you get the data? How did you gather the data for your book? Did you interview parents with children that had, issues with some of this, or, from past clients?
Oh, yeah, I gathered those stats starting in 2016 from, the CDC website and other government websites about what's going on with our kids. We have obesity issues, we have, ADHD issues, we have autistic issues, we have sensory processing, the list goes on. Every family in this United States, if they don't have a kid who falls into one of those categories, they know a family or 10 that does. It's everywhere. 50% of our kids right now are dealing with something, and that number is only escalating. So you can find the stats that I put in my book. Some look even worse than what I have quoted, but it's right about 1 in 54 kids right now, particularly higher in boys, will deal with autism. Yeah, you're aware. And ADHD, I think, is 1 in 10, and anxiety is 1 in 8. And the numbers are rising. So that was huge impetus, because I have kids that fall into several of those categories. So how do I help them when the doctors are just like, go take a pill?
Right, here's your medication. One of the things that I wish I had known when my child was young, because he's 19 now, was the gut biome association with autism.
Oh, yeah.
I wish I had known that, because, obviously changing his diet and making sure that he was where he should have been, it may have made a difference. But how do you know? How do you know?
How do you know is right, and it's certainly better to do it when they're younger and more pliable and more at, I don't want to say at your mercy, but once they can drive, they're going to go out and they're going to go to McDonald's, and they're going to do what their peers are doing. And so if we can establish those good habits when they're young, it's amazing. You made me want to talk about something that's in the book, and anybody can go and Google this. It's a video that was produced by one of the doctors who works for the Environmental Working Group, who studies the toxins in the air, in the water, and so on and so forth. And he had a pregnant wife. And so he decided to see if there were any toxins in the cord blood of the baby, who was not yet born. And so he extracted cord blood from her, his pregnant wife, and from 9 other women, guaranteed, small study, 10 women, shocking results. So he found over 272 chemicals already in the cord blood of the babies
Oh,
were
wow.
not yet born. And some of those chemicals had been banned 40 years ago. And so what we're dealing with is children who are growing their bodies in a chemical stew. And so we end up with mutations in their genetics. So I don't know if you've heard about MTHFR. One of my kids has that genetic mutation. And so fortunately, it's not a double copy. He just has one copy. So for him, that means 30% of these processes I'll describe are affected. So he is 30% less deficient in releasing toxins from his body. That's
Wow.
huge. And he's 30% less efficient to metabolize nutrients and bring it into his body to use. You know, body and brain kind of get affected by that. And he's also got a very compromised digestive system. And so all of that requires that we know what genetic mutations our children have in order to supplement and feed them correctly. And it's a big deal. It's a big process. And if you've got one of those kids who's pretty deep on the spectrum, it is really well worth the money to get that genetic test and to have that raw data looked at by a physician or a naturopath who is schooled to tell you what that all means, because you just get a bunch of numbers and things on a paper
Right.
her mom's not going to get.
I wonder if it's too late for a 19-year-old.
Sometimes it takes till they're 25 or so for them to like decide, yeah, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to take care of my health. So when my more challenged kid was under my roof, I was able to do all of that for him. And now that he's on his own, more or less, he just let that all go by the wayside. But guess what? He's about to be 21, and all of a sudden, he's interested and taking his supplements again and thinking about diet. And I'm like, amen. I planted the seed, right? And it, in a young person's quest for individuation, obviously sometimes they let all that go. Like they let go of what their parents told them to do, right? They're supposed to, in their way, create their own path in life. But hopefully if you plant the seed, they'll come back to it and let that flower.
Well, it's funny because one of the things that you said was that they found over 200 toxins in the cord blood.
Yeah.
And on the other side of that, they're using the cord blood for the stem cells.
Yes.
So what happens with the stem cells that they use?
That's a very good question, because we saved his stem cells. They've been frozen in a Boston lab for 21 years. So I don't know what that means. That is a very good question. What it means in his body was that this genetic mutation happened. And so can that cord blood be put through a wash of sorts to clean it up? I don't know that we have that technology yet, but very interesting question.
Yep, that's my Aquarian brain.
I like where it goes.
So one of the questions I know that I was going to ask you was about, how has the sleep patterns of these children changed?
Ah,
And what's what was the cause of it, or what's the effect of it, I should say?
I love that question, because most of these kids are affected whether or not they have genetic mutations. All of us, kids, you, me, grandma, everybody is affected by the light, right? So we are creatures on the planet just like all of the other creatures that roam around, only we think somehow we are above that and not affected by nature's rhythms or the rhythms of the day and the night. And so I want to start out by saying I taught a mindfulness class for middle schoolers for a while. The school had isolated these kids who were really kind of high risk. They had a lot of anxiety and they weren't performing well in school, though they were smart. And so we would get them together and do these mindfulness exercises. And they were 9 to 11 years old. And every single one of them said their parents would put them to bed at 8 or 9 and they couldn't fall asleep till midnight. And that was a real wake up for me at that time. They're all affected by the blue light that comes through the many screens that we all use in our modern life, right? And so that inhibits the melatonin from being released from their pineal gland, and they do not get the message that it's time to sleep. So now that there's a greater understanding in the scientific world about that, there's a lot of people who are making the move to buy their children blue blockers glasses so that when they do their homework on their computer, or just making sure that the screens are out of their room, when it's time for bed, so that they can release that melatonin and get them to sleep. I suffer from it too. Like, it's quite enchanting to have a whole world of information at your fingertips, through your laptop or your phone. And it's difficult for people to put that away,
Yeah.
especially kids. So that is a huge subject. And there's now this segment of science called chronobiology, which I think is fascinating, that is all about the science of natural cycles that we're all subject to on the planet, that even stem cells are subject to. So you mentioned stem cells earlier. They find that if stem cells are implanted in bone marrow and during the right circadian part of the day, that they do better. Like they
Really?
yeah, it's really fascinating. So circadian rhythms not only linked to sleep cycles, but also diabetes, depression, all sorts of things. So we really got to get a handle on that.
We do.
So,
We do. So
yeah,
how do you address that? How do you address the childhood disease um, in your book, if you do?
childhood dis-ease, many different ways. When we move into the chapters of, towards the end of the book, spring, summer, fall, and winter, each chapter looks at the challenges of the season, right? So we can't, just like we can't treat all of our children the same, they don't have the same gifts or challenges and require different ways of educating or feeding even. We also can't approach every season the same. In the summer, we overheat, right? We need to maybe not have that spicy quesadilla. We maybe need to eat more melons that are watery and can help cool us down. So there are food practices within each season, and there are yogic practices, there's meditation practices, there are breathing practices, there are different energy medicine practices, and outside suggestions. Like, we as people have really begun to spend most of our time inside. I know a lot of people who say they never go out. And that's just crazy to me. We're like the trees, right? We need the sun, we need the earth, we need all of those things to be healthy.
We're part of it.
Yeah, we like to think we're not, but we are subject to all those rhythms. Yeah. So I was really happy to learn about that new science of chronobiology.
So did you address that part for parents in the book about, the importance of the circadian rhythm?
Yeah,
We talked about the blue light, but
yeah, particularly in the fall chapter, because that's when it hits us really hard. Like, it doesn't matter so much when your child is experiencing the unstructured days of summer and sort of running wild with, whatever they want to do or whatever you want them to do. But when you have to shift into those school months in September, that's really hard. Like, it's hard for kids to get back in sync with with the clock that's required of them. Um, but for some personalities, it's really difficult for them as well because they don't like that structure.
Right.
We talk a lot in the unique child chapter about the different elements that can present in a person's persona. Let's say metallic. I'm not sure if you're um, aware of the Chinese metal element, which can produce a really kind of rigid person who's very competitive and really wants to do well on the test and will cry if they don't get an A plus. There are kids like that, and that's great. And they're going to love going back to school because that's how they work. But then
Right.
there's other kids who are more of a watery nature who don't want to leave the house, or they very emotional about having to be in a classroom full of wildness, and it takes a lot to support them through that transition. So I have different suggestions in all of the chapters for the different types of kids who might be affected by the seasons.
So in leading into that, into the next question was about, you know, kids in school, right? And I know we discussed how the school system isn't set up to nurture every single child in the way they learn. You know,
Absolutely.
so what do you talk about as far as that's concerned, and what should parents look for?
Yeah, to tell you the truth, I encourage people to homeschool. I, I do, and I realize full well how difficult that may be and how impossible that might be for some families. And so charter schools might be an alternative. A school, let's say you have a child who has a very naturalistic kind of intelligence and they want to be out like making plants grow. There are kids like that. My son is one of them. He's very much nature centric and connected to the outdoor world in that way. Um, Waldorf school is wonderful for those kinds of kids. So there are alternative schools that we can bring those children to if we can afford to do that. And if not, we can duplicate it at home to the best of our ability. And if we can do none of those things and we have to send them to public school, then I got some suggestions in the chapters to make it easier for them. And lots of links. I want to say this, the book is written with busy moms in mind, right? Like myself, like I wanted to have all this information at my disposal, but when you're in the thick of it and you're raising your children, you're often way too busy for any of that.
Right.
And so I hold this book up, and I know it'll probably be backwards, but it's color coded. So if you can see the pages, they're color coded by the seasons, and they have links inside of them for people to do their own research, which I always encourage. Some people reading the book will already know about circadian rhythms, and some will not be aware at all. And so if they want, they can click the links, and they can do that on my website. So I have this embedded page. Once you purchase the book, you can just go to that page, and all the links within the chapters are clickable, so you can look into all of it more and create a program for your child that works for you and for them. I have recipes in regards to the seasons as well. So one of the things that we should know as we go into winter is that we need to eat heavier foods, right? We need to warm the internal core of the body with maybe more meats and oils and more starchy foods. And when we go into spring, that needs to shift. And if we don't shift that, we end up with a kid who's very mucusy, right? A lot of our children really deal with a lot of colds and mucus and phlegm and things in
Allergies.
spring, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can take precautions in the winter and in spring, we can shift to that for them so that they're not dealing with that physical part of the season's implications.
What do you think from your research? Do you think causes that? What's the cause of it? I mean, it's not just environmental, right?
it isn't just environmental, and the cause for it can be different for different people. Like we spoke about my son who doesn't release toxins very well and doesn't manage food input. So that could be a big part of somebody's struggles. It could also just be like picky eating. Like I don't want to eat that green thing, or that, I want to have my tacos like I always do. Um, so there's that part. There is also the part about it's the energy the parents are bringing into it and their inability to change and shift. I think that is often the case with kids, is they're mimicking us. And so I think that this book is wonderful even for people that don't have children, who are trying to prepare to have children, and to set up routines in their own households that work. Like what's going to be on my table or on my shelf? What are my personal practices going to look like as the season changes? So I'm thinking a lot around winter right now because we're about to enter that season. And I don't know what it was. It started out as a virus that quickly turned into a really long experience this fall with a sinus infection and an ear infection, which totally surprised me. I haven't been like that in years and years. And so I'm really modifying things in my kitchen to make me healthier as I go into winter.
Good.
Maybe for me, that might mean removing gluten for a while, or sugar, or dairy, all of those things that we love and they're hard to let go of. I have a reason I want to go to Egypt in March and I want to be well. So I'm going to take those precautions. But, so often we don't, and we enter winter in crowds, right? We're in school and we're going to Christmas parties and Thanksgiving gatherings and all of those things. And we all know that as the weather shifts, viruses and flus and all of those things kind of manifest. And in the past, if we were following the circannual seasons and what it requires of us, we kind of hole up. Like we kind of go within. It's our time to like be by the fire and dream a new dream, and maybe look at our seed catalog and decide what we're going to plant in the spring, and we become more internalized. But the way we live in our culture has us out and about, as much as we want. We can be out and about 24/7 in some places, and going against those natural rhythms and getting sick. So I think that I would love people to kind of return to some of that ancient wisdom that we've let go in the sake of convenience.
Yes, it would be nice. Now, my next question, although I don't want it to be controversial, it's just a question because, had I known then what I know now, I probably would have been a little more stringent about the vaccines I allowed my children to get. Only because there were some side effects that, you can't predict. And how do you balance that? How do you mitigate if you decide that that's the way you're going to go? How do you mitigate some of those side effects and what it causes in their bodies, right, as they grow?
Absolutely. One of the things I did was that I asked for individual doses when I dragged out what vaccinations I decided to give. I would never give 2 in one shot like some people do. I did not do the MMR vaccine, which has 3 things together. And I discounted some of them completely because they didn't make sense to me once I looked at the potential for that disease. And I asked for individual doses. So if you get a community vial of a vaccination, it's going to have far more preservatives in it than if you get a single dose vial. Think of how many times a nurse has to stick a needle in to draw up that vaccine. So it has to be preserved. And the other thing I learned along the way is that Yeah, there are heavy metals in vaccinations. There's a lot of aluminum still. And though most of the mercury has been removed, there are still some with thimerosal, which is mercury, in our vaccines. And I provide a link to the CDC where people can go and do that research themselves. Like, I don't want them to believe me. I want them to understand and make an
Right.
informed choice. And you can grill a doctor, and they don't know what's in there. They're just going through the motions. They've been told by the AMA or the CDC that this is what we do. And that's what I'm talking about as far as stepping back from the cultural narrative. Like, don't, it's difficult for us to look at the stats on our children's health and look at our position in the world, in this industrial nation, like one of the best, most profitable countries in the world. We have all of these advantages. Why aren't our kids healthier? We have all these government agencies looking over and deciding on these vaccine schedules and medication and health plans and educational programs, and yet we're struggling badly in comparison to many countries. And so if a parent just looked at that alone, they're gonna have to ask a question. Why is that? And so I want to get back to that heavy metal question. So if a parent asks the nurse to shake the vial, it's going to disperse those metals a little bit more, because heavy metals by their nature sink to the bottom of the vial, right? And so if you're the unlucky kid who gets that last dose and the nurse doesn't know to shake it, you might get way more than you bargained for with that vaccination. And so that's not something that's talked about. In fact, that kind of conversation is suppressed.
Right.
And why? We're doing the one thing I want to say in regards to vaccination is such a hot topic, especially with COVID and all, that we all want the same thing, no matter which side of the debate we're on. We want to protect people that we love. And so why
Right.
not have all the information so that we can do that in the best way that we can?
Yeah, I think that's super important. And I'm glad you explained it that way, because it takes away the debate issue. Everybody has to do their research. And I think part of that comes down to the parents participating in not only their own welfare, but the welfare of their child, and ask the right questions and let them know that it's okay to ask those questions.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of fear out there about
Yeah.
asking questions and maybe causing trouble, and at the end of the day, the trouble doesn't matter. What matters is your child. What matters is your health, and that you're asking the questions so that you can get them the best health care, or keep them in the best health, or feed them the best foods. Who wouldn't want that? But
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know exactly if all parents participate in that. That's,
Well, isn't that the meaning of informed consent?
you would think.
Right? You would think, but that conversation is definitely being silenced
Yes.
in this day and time. And my concerns about vaccines went way back, like way before any kind of COVID situation happened. And I learned a lot by asking questions. And I learned that the doctors don't have the answers, and that they're just going through the motions, like the many parents who don't ask. Like, we have been cultured to just accept this narrative and, roll up our sleeve or, all of that. So I'm a question asker too, because once you put it in, it's really hard to get out. But I do want to talk about that, because you asked, like, what would you do? Like, if you've decided to vaccinate and your kid has a response that seems out of character, definitely do not give Tylenol. We now know that acetaminophen can really exacerbate the effects of the bad effects of a vaccine. There's a product that I use in my practice called TRS, which stands for the Toxin Removal System. And it's just a spray, like anybody can do it. It's super simple. It doesn't have a taste. You put it under your tongue. And it's created from volcanic rock, believe it or not. So this product has been used since the 70s, I think, for industrial toxic spills. So they knew that one of the ways to clean up these spills was to put this particular volcanic ash on top of them. And the way the molecule of this ash is structured, it just absorbs the toxin into this cage and it can be cleaned up very easily. So how it works in our body is that the best of these products are actually synthesized in a lab. I hate to say that, but they are, because their job is to attract toxins. So even if they're out in nature, they're going to do that. So we want something that's really clean. So it's a nanoparticle. You spray it under your tongue, and it goes throughout the body. It goes through the blood-brain barrier, and it grabs onto those toxins, and it cages them within this little tiny molecule, and then you pee it out. And so this is measurable. You can do some blood tests, you can do some urine tests, you can find out what your body level of toxins are, and then you can begin to use the toxin removal spray for a couple, 3 months, and do another test and see that, yeah, your toxin levels are way lower. So there's been some really fabulous reports from people whose kids are on the spectrum, about, hey, my child no longer walks on their tippy toes when I've started to, just a lot of different things, or their speech has improved, many different things to show that their toxic burden has lessened.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm super psyched about it. It's kind of pricey, which is unfortunate. The one I'm using, like a $95 bottle, will last 2 people close to 2 months. So when you break it down that way, it's not so bad, but the initial investment can be high for people.
What's the name of the product?
TRS. I will send you a link.
Okay. I wonder if Mark Cuban's prescription website sells it, because it's the prescription website that he has is very same drugs as a typical pharmaceutical company, but 20 times less the price.
What?
Yeah.
Now you need to tell me. Tell me about this. Who is Mark Cuban?
Mark Cuban. He's one of the millionaires in the world, but he used to. I think he used to own a sports team, from what I remember. I could be wrong, but he's been involved in not the pharmaceutical industry, but bringing pharmaceuticals to people that need it for a reasonable price. So if you paid $400 for a prescription, you probably can get it from him for $12, because I believe he goes through Canada to get them.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so you can just Google his name and go onto his prescription website, and you put in whatever prescription you're taking or medication, and it'll give you his price.
That's amazing.
You just have to have a script for it.
Oh, there's no script for this. This is one of those holistic wellness approaches, like, Epsom salt bath, right? You don't need a script for that.
So, yeah, I mean, but for other people that might not, have health insurance, it's a good option.
Yeah.
It's a good option.
That's good to know.
So my next question for you, as we're talking about all of this, so what has the feedback been about your book?
I've gotten some really good feedback. The ease of use is wonderful, and I think people are a little kind of confused about the title, which is why I wanted to talk about that. So I do still get a lot of questions, and I want to address something that you said at the beginning that I didn't address, and that was, did I interview parents? So yeah, I did, but I didn't interview them in like, what is your child dealing with as far as dis-ease? I asked what their concerns were for their kids around the future. And so a surprising amount of parents talked about food safety and food availability
Mhm.
and just general safety in the world. And I want to talk about that a little bit because it's only been a few generations since we understood and practiced gardening and growing our own food and even foraging. So I've been trying to teach myself a lot of that. For instance, I mentioned that I'd been sick for the fall, and I found great relief with mullein, which is just a very common plant that grows everywhere. It was in my yard, it was on all the walks that I did with my dogs. I've turned it into tea, I've turned it into tincture, and it's great for lung support, respiratory wellness. And here we are moving into winter. And do you want to have that on your shelf like we did for hundreds and hundreds of years? Like we understood that um, food was medicine and plants were medicine, and most medications are fashioned after plants. Most pharmaceuticals are fashioned after plants. So there's that. And there's also the fact that our kids participated in the growing of food and the cooking of food. And now we're barely doing that. Like parents are stressed to the max and they're buying convenience foods and kids don't know what a pomegranate is or what does an acorn squash look like? We're so distanced from the earth. So there's a big call in those chapters of the seasonal chapters to get your kids out on the trail, like teach them what a maple leaf is compared to a beech leaf, or what might you be able to use in the forest for your wellness. And I did that in response to just the surprising amount of parents who had these kind of safety concerns about letting their kids outside alone. Like, do you remember growing up? Like, was your mom monitoring your every move? No, you're outside playing with your friends in the neighborhood, and unless you grew up in a city, but it looked a little different. You were still out. Maybe it was concrete instead of green.
12 hours a day at least.
Yeah, but
Summer.
with the media being what it is and wanting to talk about all the negatives in the world, parents are afraid. You're afraid to let their kid out. Well, what if they get hurt? What if somebody steals them? And the consequences are huge.
Right.
My niece, who's 21, still won't go barefoot because her mom was all about, oh my God, you might get stung by a bee. So she's still not even accessing earth with her feet. And we should all have heard about the benefits of earthing by now, right?
Oh
Like
my
just right.
goodness, absolutely. There's
Yeah.
actually there's actually a couple that live in Lisbon, Connecticut that are in my networking group that do homesteading, but they have a foraging class.
Wow.
So people can for $10 or what I think it was like $10, they can go on this forage and they point out all the native plants that people can actually use either in medicine or for food, or if you're out hiking and you need to hydrate yourself. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But it's like right here, it's so local, right? Because you're in Eastern Connecticut too. So
Yeah, that's really good to know. I've taken some foraging hikes myself. Mushroom ID walks and winter foraging, spring foraging. I learned about usnea, which is a little kind of, I don't know if you call it a fungi or not. It's a mossy thing that grows in trees without roots. Also very good for respiratory wellness. And I've been collecting that all year to make a tincture with. But we need to turn around and teach our kids this. Nobody taught us, right?
right.
We distanced ourselves from all of this because, culture. Culture
Right.
moves on and thinks science has the better answer. Maybe sometimes it does, but it doesn't always.
Right. There's alternative answers.
Exactly. Case in point would be GMO foods. And I know that you're super aware of all of
Yes.
that and the toxins around glyphosate and how it's wrecking the guts of us and our kids. And just getting back to growing a garden in your own backyard is medicine. Not only are we going to be able to eat good quality food for cheaper, we're getting our hands in the dirt. That's actually like a vaccination, right? Getting that soil bacteria under our fingernails and into our body is very healing.
Very
And
therapeutic.
yeah, therapeutic and medicinal, and it's exercise, and we're connecting with, the seasons and the sun and all of it. And we don't do that. We go to the grocery store and buy some GMO foods because they're cheap and easy. And that's really sad. I wanted to, especially with prices. Prices are out of control right now at the grocery store, right? What are I think it's 30% increased
Oh
from.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, at least. So 30% for often garbage food. That's not going to be helpful to us in the least. And here we are on the brink of all sorts of economic woes. Excuse me, who knows what's coming.
Right.
And part of my research, I forgot what chapter this is included in, was around Russia. In 1991, Russia's economy tanked. We heard stories of, like, I think their money was called rubles. I don't remember anymore. Wheelbarrows of Russian money being brought to the store. If you could find a loaf of bread, you could buy it with this. But the truth is, Russia has a backyard gardening program called Dacha, Dacha. They encourage people to grow their own food. So even though they went through this big economic, destruction,
Yeah.
nobody starved, because 60 to 70% of food in Russia is grown in backyards. And so people just traded, I'll barter this zucchini for that watermelon or whatever it was. And that's still the case in Russia. They're still into growing their own food. And in America, we have Bill Gates buying up farmland and seed banks and telling everybody that, glyphosate is the way of the future. No,
No, absolutely not.
none of that is true. So if you're paying attention to any of that science, like, it hasn't been a good program. I understand that there have been, I think, 500 agricultural groups that have band together in response to his recent quest to get people to accept, more GMOs on their shelf. And it's scary. So we may not want to garden, but we should garden, and we should teach our children to do that. And I'm so thankful, though my mom wasn't of a generation that did that. My grandparents were, and I was very in touch with them. And so they taught me a lot about all of that and the benefits of it.
Mine too. My family too. Always. But I think, if the world goes the way that I think it's going, we're going to have to grow our own food. And people need to learn to be responsible for themselves and not rely on the system to take care of them, because the system may not always be there, or it will be there, but not the way they want it to be there for them.
Yeah.
Right. And so it takes some of the control away from the big system and puts it back to the person. And they're setting an example for their children, which I think is super important, right? And you're nurturing your body with food that what went into the ground, how you grew it, what went on it, right? The bees participated because we actually have bees.
Yes.
So it's a cycle, right? That we could teach our children on how to do that. And I don't know, that part gets me really excited because I think it's so important. And can you imagine the healthy children that we'll raise in the future if we could do it that way?
Yeah, I'm excited about that too. Like, passing down generational wisdom instead of cultural and corporate narrative to our kids. That's so important. So really, I guess that's a lot of what my book is about.
Well, that's a lot of information. I mean, do you plan on where can people get your book?
They can get it either on my website, which is www.rewildyourchild.net. And it is available there if they want a signed copy for a little bit less. But you can also get it on Amazon. They'll probably be quicker, quicker to ship and all. So if you're an Amazon person, please buy it there. Whatever works for you.
And how do people get in touch with you if they want to ask you a question or talk to you or give you information?
I think my email, and there's a contact form on the site, so my email is on that site too. And it's Sherry at rewildyourchild.net, I believe.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's a good thing. So I think that I'm going to have you come back on in a few months because I want to see how the book does, which I
Oh,
suspect it will do really well. There's a group that I want to put you in touch with. It's called CTRAM in Connecticut. It's Connecticut Residents Against Medical Mandates. That's what it stands for, but it's a lot more than that. And the woman who runs it is actually looking to start her own charter schools
woo!
for kids. So I think you'd be a really good person for her to talk to. Her name is Kate Prokop. I don't know if you've heard of her or not, but she has, I think there's 28,000 people in the group now. I mean, it's been crazy, but I thought of her as soon as you said that about the charter schools. So she just recently put this out there, which is good. Yeah, this is great. So we'll make some good connections there.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, I just definitely want you to come back because I know there's a lot more that we can talk about.
Oh, yes. I would like to see how my book's doing too. It's only been out for a month, so I really appreciate you having me on and just starting to explore what this is about. And I'll add that there is a nature school that I think is in Thompson, Connecticut, just popped up where they're teaching kids outside as much as they can.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's so nice to hear.
It is. There's stats that show kids learn better outside. Wow, who knew? Not wearing masks behind plexiglass with
Right.
fluorescent lights? I don't get it.
Right. And dry heat all day long. Oh my
Right.
goodness.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for doing this, though.
Thank you for having
Really
me.
appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of Awakened Soul Stories. So again, if you want to get in touch with Sherry, you can go to her website, which is www.rewildyourchild.net.
Yes.
Okay.
And there should be a contact form there as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, and we'll hopefully see you in the